Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Draft Capital here on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. I'm Stephen Gillespie, and first of all, ladies and gentlemen, I know that a couple of you have already retweeted the first attempt at the show that we were having today. I appreciate all the support and love and all of that you've already given me. But we're going to be starting the show for real this time. There was just a little bit of technical difficulties. It happens to the best of us, but we're going to be rolling strong here on today's show. And we have a great guest lined up, and we have a fun slate of prospects. I don't know if you're going to find another podcast where you're going to be having so much kind of funky, fun players to watch, as we're going to be discussing today. And I can't think of a better guest than the one that I have lined up today to discuss these players. And today's show is going to be titled Leveling with CJ Marchesani. CJ, welcome to the show, man. Glad to have you on. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing good. I appreciate you having me on. Looking forward to talking some fun, funky prospects.
Yeah, man. I mean, I love funky, and that's exactly what these type of players are today. But before we get into them, I would like for you just to introduce yourself for maybe some of my viewers, listeners, who may not be familiar with you and your work.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, my name is CJ Marchesani. I work for Sports Aptitude. I do a little bit of stuff at the Stepien, run Roll Call Sports, do some private consulting. Other than that, share a ton of clips and charts and analytics stuff on Twitter and do the best I can to keep the community moving.
Yeah, and you do a great job with that. You know, there are a number of podcasts that I listen to, Upside Swings, Chucking Darts, all of those guys are tremendous. And I know that you have, made stops on there and talked about several prospects. And, there's always a list of guests, I feel like people like myself have. And it's always a pleasure whenever you have one of these guests on that you're just like, I can't wait to get this guy on. It's just a matter of making sure that the schedules match up. And you were on that list, CJ, and I'm a big fan of you, first off, and have the utmost respect for the way that you evaluate the amount of work that you put in, and just kind of how you've uplifted the community, kind of how you alluded to earlier. It's a tremendous honor to have you on the show. I know that you're just a guy, and I know that you say it's no big deal, but it means a big deal to me, man. So I'm glad to have you on the show today. And before we dive into the prospects, I want to just get this Built Bar plug done real quick. I just want to remind all of our listeners that unlike all the other bars that are out there that taste either like old Play-Doh or a piece of cardboard, when you eat a Built Bar, you will think that you're cheating on your diet with a delicious chocolate dessert. If your kids find out how good these things are, you're going to have to buy more because they're going to be begging for them. They have great flavors like cookies and cream, double chocolate, strawberry, peanut butter brownie, and much more. They also have a mystery flavor that if you guess correctly, you can win a prize. Just go over to built.com, enter in promo code off the ball, which is for the network that I contribute to, the Off the Ball Network. If when you enter in that code, you'll be able to get a 10% discount because the folks over there are such nice people. They'll hook you up with that code. Just enter in off the ball for that promo code. All right, so CJ, bills are paid. Now we get to have fun. We're going to talk about the first of these funky prospects, and just to kind of again, I'm going to name this the title of this episode, Leveling. A lot of these guys I have a hard time evaluating because whether or not it's the way that they play, the schematic that they have for the college that they're playing with, maybe the talent around them isn't necessarily the best relative to some of these other prospects that we're evaluating for the draft. And the first guy that I want to talk about is freshman guard Blake Wesley from Notre Dame. He's about 6'5", 185 pounds. His averages right now are 14 points per game, 3 boards, 2 assists, 0.1 block, a steal a game, shooting about 44% from the floor, 34% from deep. He grades out in the 61st percentile overall offensively per synergy, 34th defensively. CJ, when you watch Blake Wesley, what kind of a player does he appear to be to you at the next level?
Yeah, I think out of all these guys that we're going to talk about today, I think Wesley is the guy. I think that he's a legitimate first-round pick, especially in a draft that the young talent hasn't necessarily grabbed the opportunity, So I think that there's some spots open in the first round for maybe more unheralded guys like Wesley to jump in. He's 6'5", but 6'11" wingspan, which is super long, allows him to get a lot of height on his jumper. He's excellent getting downhill and getting to the rim. I would wish he would finish a little bit better when he got there, but he's young. That's to come. He's got 8 dunks this year, definitely an above the rim athlete. And really, I think he has all the makings of a 3-level scorer, which is not something you get to say very often in a unheralded freshman. So I think he has some real ground to make up in the draft.
Yeah, that's fair. And just to be completely honest, we're getting to know each other here, CJ. I'll be transparent, to kind of further and continue our friendship with one another here. I don't have a first round grade on Wesley, and I think part of the reason might be that he plays at Notre Dame. And look, be honest, this is not an organization, or I guess a program that yields a lot of one and done talent. I mean, I can't remember the last Notre Dame prospect that went and played pro. I mean, maybe Luke Arengody might be the last guy from Notre Dame that did that. And typically, I don't hold that against prospects because each guy is different. But I think that kind of inhibits his abilities because it's a very upperclassman ran team. Even Blake has kind of had to pay his dues, so to speak, and the teammates around him almost kind of shoo him away sometimes, I feel like. I mean, if you look in the last game where they played against North Carolina, especially later on in the game, in the first half, he was just lights out. In the second half, he still played well. He got his looks, but he's not really necessarily showcased, I guess, is the best way that I can put it. And he does a lot of creation off the dribble for this team. Do you think that that's what a team is going to draft him for at the next level? Because, I mean, if a lot of places that I see him projected, he's going to be drafted kind of later in the first is where his neighborhood is for most outlets. And I'm having a hard time just myself personally, CJ. Maybe you can kind of shed some light on this and help me out a little bit here. But I think at the next level, a team that's going to take him later on, I don't necessarily think that he's going to be a creator off the dribble. Maybe he's asked to do a little bit more supporting cast type roles around the perimeter. And that 3-point shot really bugs me a little bit because it doesn't always necessarily look the same every time that he shoots. And sometimes that loading or, that the amount of time it takes him to get that shot off, it's kind of slow sometimes. And I don't know how that necessarily translates to that next level. Do you think that there's any merit to that, or do you think that maybe I'm not seeing enough of him?
No, there's absolutely merit to that, and I think that's part of the give and take, right? I mean, if he were a knock out of the ballpark first round pick, he would be more highly recruited. We'd be talking about him there, right? But to start with the first point, I think it's more a testament to how good he is that he is playing major minutes, and he's the second leading scorer on a Notre Dame team whose next 6, I believe, top minute getters are seniors. He's playing on a very veteran team. He's earned their trust very quickly. And the shot, I'm not necessarily worried about because at his age and at his part of his development arc, I mostly just want to see guys showing a natural touch, which I think he does, and also getting the volume of shots up. I think for projection, the volume of 3-point attempts, especially off the dribble like he gets, is just as important, if not more important, than the accuracy. So I'm not necessarily worried about the shot. I do think your point about where he lands is a good one. I don't think he's going to be expected to run offenses early. And I think it's almost better that he's going to go into a structure probably that is winning basketball and maybe be asked to create off second side offense or off rotations or as a slasher at first, because he can grow a little bit into the team basketball point of the game, which I think you're pointing out. But when we're talking about a guy that can get his own shot like that with that monster wingspan, defensive upside, they're not a very common archetype. So if maybe he takes that experience from playing on this veteran team and turns that into he's not demanding the ball and he's not a prima donna kind of player at the next level, then he can get those self-created looks within the offense and have it almost flow naturally. And I do think he's more of a play finisher at the next level. I don't think he's going to be creating offense for a team, but I think that he could be a valuable one. And he's young enough and has been productive enough as a freshman to project maybe, if not impact, then definitely a high level off-ball scoring at the next level.
And that's fair, and he is used off the ball quite a bit at Notre Dame. Again, we keep talking about the construct of this Notre Dame team. A lot of it has to do with there are a lot of upperclassmen, and they have an established system. And trying to fit a kind of a blue chip prospect here, Blake Wesley, into that scheme, a little bit of give and take. I mean, how many freshmen right now were highly touted come in and are playing on teams where they're not necessarily featured? I can think of guys like Caleb Houston, Max Christie, Peyton Watson. A lot of these guys, where they come into the season highly touted, they kind of fall to the mean a little bit. Meanwhile, Blake Wesley has kind of risen up to almost that same level, if not exceeded a couple of those guys already, because those expectations weren't necessarily there. But again, he's not featured either. So it's really cool to see kind of that dichotomy, how that exists in college basketball. And expectations have to do a lot of with the projection of these guys, and whether or not they live up to them. It kind of spells out where they're going to be drafted, right? So I want to talk to you a little bit about the good things that I do see with Blake Wesley's game. I got the bad part out of the way. I got to get that out of there. But I'm an optimist by heart. I like to see the best in people, let alone basketball players, right? So I love his transition game, and I think whenever he does get to the next level, I do think he will be drafted. Obviously, playing in a more wide open system, I think is going to help him out a lot, because Notre Dame, while they do have, a big man that can shoot, they do have other guards that can help take pressure off of Blake Wesley. Is not necessarily the best spacing or the most efficient style offense for his archetype, like you pointed out earlier. I think when he does get to the next level, obviously more open lanes, transition opportunities where he does flourish for Notre Dame. And I think the fact that he'll have better defensive talent around him, obviously, too, at that next level, especially if he is drafted kind of later in that first round, kind of hide some of his blemishes where, he's graded out at about league average in college basketball in the 34th percentile defensively, but still, he does have a lot of growing up to do on that end. But as you pointed out, he's very young. What do you make of his, kind of the transition ability of his game? And then if you could also shed light on how you break down his defensive game.
Yeah, I think that I'll start with the defense because I think that's a
Sure.
good point. And I don't necessarily think he's an impact defender at the next level, but 6'11" wingspans just unlock a whole different area on the defensive end of the floor than if
Sure.
it really makes up for a lot of sins. So he's not like an instinctive defender where I feel he's processing the game at a level quicker than it's being played. He's more of a reactive defender, kind of like he's more of a reactive passer. He's not a next level processor.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, even if he is a average team defender, with wingspan, get some steals, because he does create some steals from time to time. I
Yep.
think that it's hard to be a negative player as, let's say, a two guard at 6'5" with a 6'11" wingspan. There's just not a good way to pick on you. In isolation, he moves his feet well enough. He's not going to get picked on. And I think it's more of as his body develops, of course, I think it's more of is he going to help us on the defensive left side, or is he just going to be like about league average? Because with his tools and his mobility, I don't really see a path where he's like the worst defender on an NBA floor, and you have to worry about scheming around him. I think he's smart enough on the defensive end and long enough on the defensive end that the floor is relatively safe. So I'm not too concerned about. Obviously, I would like to see more recognition, and I love team defense, and he's not necessarily that top tier guy there yet.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think he has to be helpful and to be good enough to allow him to stay on the floor for his offense. And you mentioned the transition game to start. I think that is a chance for him to show his natural skills outside of the formation of the Notre Dame offense. I think it's going to be less of a part of his game in the NBA just because transition's less of a part of the game.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a lot of faith in his offense. I think he's going to be perfectly helpful as a second side creator early in his career and a rotation guard early in his career. And it helps to be able to get out and run in transition and put one down on somebody every once in a while.
Yeah, no doubt. And, I'm speaking of him ultimately, I think, as how I'm looking at him against first units. But I mean, we also have to consider that Blake Wesley, if he's going to be a late first rounder, even a late lottery pick, he's probably not going to ask to come in, especially with this draft class. It's been touted as weak in relation to the one prior and the one that's coming up, right? Um, Based on where he's projected to be drafted, it's not like he's going to come in and be the franchise's savior, honestly. But and thinking about that, thinking again of him being in second units, things like that. There's definitely a world where Blake Wesley can showcase his strengths, and again, depending on where he lands, the team's development staff can obviously get the best out of a guy like Blake Wesley, because you point out his physical tools, and you spoke to the fact that he can read passing lanes and make good plays. Just again, that North Carolina game stands out as another one. In the second half, there were several times where teams were attempting skip passes, and he's not even though he's a freshman, he's a sharp kid, and then you can't just lull him to sleep on the defensive end, so to speak. So
Yeah,
go ahead.
No, I just think that looking through that, even after the top 10, top 15 lottery, there aren't many guys that you can look at and even squint and see a 3-level score. It's such an important archetype, and at 6'5", 6'11" wingspan, 3-level score, you can sign me up for that pretty blindly. And I like some of the stuff he does when I watch. So I'm definitely interested.
Yeah, and he's funky. I like funky. It's just unshelling that and peeling the onion back a little bit and figuring out, okay, how do these funky guys with these unique archetypes, all these guys kind of fit that mold, right? They're all unique in their own way. How do they transition to the next level? And that's why I'm glad I have you on here, CJ, because you're helping me out a lot. Even so far with Blake, you're talking me into him a little bit more. Before we move on to our next guy, do you have any closing thoughts or maybe even projections on personally where you have Blake Wesley? I know that you said first round. Do you have like perhaps a range or a big board even where you have him slotted recently?
I do. I have him slotted at 21 in my most recent big board, in between Wendell Moore and Marjan. So I think that he may not necessarily get to that level by draft time, but the void of guys stepping up after the top 10 is making it easier for me to nudge up personal favorites. And yeah, I mean, at that point, you have to look at value proposition if he hits, right? I think Wesley has a good chance of hitting. I think he's a good basketball player. But there's a difference between a freshman 3-level scorer with a monster wingspan. Like that's a potential impact player.
For sure.
And I like taking that swing somewhere around 20 at this point in this draft, because especially there's just not that many other young guys there that I feel have a better value proposition. I would understand if you wanted to go older, veteran, take the for sure productive guy if that was your team need. But if I'm looking young swings to take, there aren't many better in that range than Wesley for me.
And that's fair. And I love talking, draft philosophy and, things that people like to look for in prospects, because to me, that helps me, learn more about the game myself and how I view it. And, you talk about these 3-level scores. There's a lot of 3-level scores that are all over the place on draft boards. And Blake Wesley is definitely firmly in that grouping of players. So let's talk about another young guy with a lot of funk to his game, playing out of Georgetown, Aminu Mohammed. I mean, this guy is he's all effort all the time, nonstop motor. He another one of these 6'5" guards, about 210 pounds. He looks like a full-grown man out there already on the court. He's giving you 14 points per game, almost 9 rebounds. That's insane. 2 assists, about half a block, 1.5 steals per game. And his efficiencies aren't anything to write home about overall from the floor, only shooting about 41%, 36% from deep. So I can imagine a team looking at his physical makeup, looking at that percentage from deep and saying, okay, maybe we can do a little something with this. And he's shooting about 70% from the free throw line. So the touch looks like it's translating in multiple areas on the floor. Grades out in the 46th percentile offensively on synergy, only in the 13th percentile on defense per synergy as well. So CJ, I'd love to ask you, what are your thoughts on Aminu Mohammed? Because he doesn't seem like all the other kind of point guards, maybe even a perimeter just playmaker compared to the other guys in the draft.
Yeah, Aminu's a tough one for me. I'm going to be honest with you. I think that he has a lot of things that I value. I love guys that come out and earn starting minutes as freshmen. I think it's super important. I think it's good for their progress, really, to get the ball in their hands. But he does it in a way that I don't necessarily value as much. He's kind of anti-Wesley, if you will, where Wesley's game I really buy because of the skill.
Sure.
I think Mohammed wins so much on strength and just out hustling the opposition that is not necessarily my favorite thing to buy in a prospect. I don't really love guys that win at strength at the college level because it's so much harder to win with strength at the NBA level. He gets to the rim a ton, which is good, except he's really, really, really bad when he gets there. And part of it is just shot selection. He gets to the rim and kind of like flails one up. He's per synergy, 15th percentile, 15 percentile around the basket. He's not a good finisher when he gets there. And I don't love his natural touch. This is, again, an anti-Wesley thing where he's shooting 36% from three, which is good, but it's on a low volume. Yep. It's not a very difficult shot shot diet, excuse me. And I don't know. I have some concerns. And I think that I like that he's a freshman. I like that he's productive. I think he's going to outwork everybody in every gym he ever steps in. And it's good to bet on those guys, like those outlier work guys. And he's good on the defensive end. But he's kind of a zero level scorer to me. I don't see the spot where he scores really in the NBA. And I think it muddies up the water a little bit for his projection because I'm not necessarily sure what he's doing right now, just volume getting to the rim and throwing up wild attempts and making 40% of them. I'm not sure how well that translates.
And that's fair. And just to kind of give Aminu maybe a little bit more support here, much like Blake Wesley at Notre Dame, I mean, Aminu Mohammed's playing at Georgetown, not necessarily an NBA hotbed of prospects, right? So, he doesn't really necessarily have the best spacing. I believe they play a lot of their minutes with two bigs, kind of an outdated, archaic system there as well, but very much in keeping with traditional college basketball. And the spacing isn't necessarily the best for him either. So I don't know if perhaps maybe that plays a part in his finishing ability because the paint isn't necessarily as clear as what it obviously will be at that next level. But I do see a lot of what you're laying out, CJ. The finishing, I mentioned he's shooting 12 shots per game. Only 2 of them are from deep, and he's shooting 36%, right? The rest of those shots, 10 of them are at 2-point range or around the rim. Most of them around the rim because he relies a lot on his strength and athleticism, but he's only shooting 41% overall from the floor. That's not necessarily what you want to see from a guy who is constantly driving and attacking the basket, right? And he's getting to the free throw line 5 times a game and shooting just a hair under 70%. So kind of a weird spot for a guy who fancies himself as an attacker of the basket. Isn't really necessarily setting the world on fire in terms of assists, but I do like a little bit of his playmaking and passing instincts. I think he might have a lot of what I like to call would-be assists on this team, where if you think you got league average shooters or scorers, that those numbers would kind of trend up a little bit. You touched on his defense. The synergy grades him out in the 13th percentile overall. Obviously, some of these players don't necessarily grade out the highest. I believe Tari Eason, last time I looked, was only in like the 22nd percentile defensively. It's one of those instances where I'm like, I'll just rely on the film as opposed to the statistics. That's just a data point. Talk to me a little bit about the defensive capabilities that you see Aminu Mohammed. What are his strengths on that side of the ball?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this early in the season, maybe even ever, honestly, but I think especially this early in the season, the defensive stats on synergy are not something I rely on very heavily. I think that offensively, I rely on it quite a bit, and I like to check those numbers. I think the defensive ones can be a bit misleading, and in this case, I think they are. I actually think he's a very good defender. Very good. I think he's a solid defender. He's got the tools. He really works harder than anyone else. He fights for rebounds. He fights guys at the point of attack. And at his size, and again, he's just similar to Wesley where he has those tools. At his size, he just works harder than everybody else. And that combination, I'm not worried about the defense. I think if he proves that his offense is worthy enough to get him a look in the league, the defense will be fine. That's not something I'm very concerned about.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you. And you spoke to his rebounds. I mean, 8.5 rebounds a game as a 6'5" guard.
Yeah.
That typically travels pretty well too. That level of activity.
Mm-hmm.
And again, before we move off of Aminu Mohammed, CJ, I know that you recently, I believe it was a top 40 is what you released, right? Don't
Yeah.
believe I saw Aminu Mohammed, but do you perhaps have a range where you might feel comfortable selecting him, or do you think that he's a guy that you would just like to see return next season and give his best go again?
I think right now he's probably leaning towards return for me, but he's not far out of that top 40. I would feel comfortable taking the swing on him, maybe somewhere around 45, 46. I think that the production at a young age is something that I won't look past. And like you said, Georgetown's not the best context for him to be showing his skills. I think that if he were better at those things, he would show them more. But I also think he's being asked to do, he's maybe a little bit overcast in his role in that Georgetown offense. He turns the ball over a lot. The vision's fine, but I think that in a smaller role, he maybe can do a little bit more. And the thing that's preventing him from playing that smaller role is a little bit of lack of guys at Georgetown, but also the 3-point shot. When you're playing that many big men, it's tough to have the ball in the hands of somebody or to not have the ball in the hands of a guy that also can shoot, because then the floor is just completely cramped. So I do think that he's suffering from context a little bit, and I would be willing to give him a pre-draft quote unquote go in the second round somewhere. But for his draft stock, I think a return to school is probably the best thing.
Yeah, and I think yeah, that's fair. I think that you and I are kind of the same mindset. I didn't have a second round grade on him, but CJ, I don't know how you feel about this. I believe that the talent in this draft, I think anywhere from 40 to maybe 65. I don't think that the margin of talent is that significant. It's just kind of who you like and what type of player you prefer at that moment. So I think that you and I we're kind of hand in hand on Aminu Mohammed, and that makes me glad to hear that there's at least a little validity to what I'm seeing amongst other people in the community here. So we'll move on from one kind of great rebounding perimeter player to another one. And Dereon Seabron out of North Carolina State, he's shooting up a lot of people's draft boards. I'm even starting to notice some late first round conversation on him as well. I mean, he's a 6'7" perimeter player. I think that he could probably at the next level give you minutes at the 1, 2, or the 3. I'm leaning more towards, a wing player with slashing abilities, but maybe some secondary, tertiary playmaking capabilities, because he's showing a little bit of that here for the Wolfpack. But he's only about 180 pounds. But and we'll come back to his weight, because I think that that's an interesting conversation. He's giving you about 20 points per game. Just came under 10 rebounds per game in his latest game, so he's only averaging 9.8 rebounds now. A little over 3 assists per game. I believe he got his first block of the season in his latest performance. 1.5 steals per game. This is where it gets fun. Shooting about 54% from the floor on about 14 attempts per game. Only about 25% from deep on less than 2 attempts per game, so not a lot of volume there. And 70% from the free throw line on about 7 attempts per game. So, I mean, CJ, we got a guy here who's tall, wiry, just all hustle all the time, grabs rebounds, attacks the basket, gets to the free throw line. In the offensive percentile per synergy, he grades out in the 75th. Defensively, not so bad, 66th percentile per synergy. I love watching Dereon Seabron play, because he's just unlike so many players in college basketball right now, CJ. I think that he's probably in the 99th percentile in leg span in college basketball right now. How do you like watching Dereon play? Is he one of your kind of sleeper favorites, or are you a little bit more cautious with him?
No, he's been a blast. I love when guys jump on the scenes like this. Honestly, I think he's if the season ended today, he's an ACC Player of the Year finalist, which is really cool to see from a guy that didn't really pop last year. I think it's important for context, though, to note that when we say sophomore here, he's very old for a sophomore.
Okay.
He after high school, he went to military school for 1 year and then was ruled academically ineligible his first year of college. So this sophomore season of his is really his senior aged season. So I think that that's important to put out there for context, because if he was sophomore age, he would be a top 20 guy.
For sure.
But that being said, he's still been great. He is the rim pressure king of college basketball right now. He gets downhill so well. He finishes strong. I would like to see him finish a little softer, but he's a big, strong guy, and we'll talk about the weight later. But I'm not even sure if that's right. He looks so much stronger than that, and I agree completely with what you said off the bat, in that his most likely role is a slasher, getting downhill off of closeouts and getting to the rim, which makes the 3-point shot a little bit tricky. And I've come to the school of thought that you don't necessarily need to be a good shooter to occupy your man in help defense, right? You just need to keep him out there.
Yep.
So if he can do that with his combination of passing ability and ridiculous downhill movement off closeouts, I think that could be enough. But he's shooting it a little bit better these last couple. I'd like to see that continued progress. I would like to make sure that he stays locked in, focused on basketball. But with all that being said, he's a top 40 guy for me right now. And he's a guy that you want to see it in a bigger sample, right? Because that's how when guys burst on the scenes like this, I want to see him carry this through ACC play. But if he does, he's going to have a legitimate first-round pick argument.
For sure, and he's already starting to literally work his way into that conversation right now. So, CJ, I got a question for you. Again, this is just me getting to know you and draft philosophy and things like that. You touched on his age. Now, there's a wide range of opinion as to how important age factors into draft evaluation. When you look at a guy like Dereon Seabron, you made note of, this would be his senior year as far as age goes, although he is, quote unquote, only a sophomore. When you look at that age, how does that play into your evaluation? Because I understand, and maybe you'll speak on this a little more. Like, I understand that, like, you might have more time to maximize your potential and things like that. But I'm just curious to see, like, how age factors into your evaluation and what it plays a part in.
Yeah, I don't think it's a disqualifier or anything like that. I think it's more just important for context, right? It's kind of like a benchmark thing. Like, if you are 18, 19 years old, you need to be here. If you're 20 years old, you need to be here. If you're 22 years old, you need to be here, right? Like, Chris Duarte last year was a really good example, because he was super old for his class.
Right.
He was wildly productive and hit the benchmark that you need him to hit to be considered draftable and to be considered a first-round guy. So I think with Seabron, it's just important to know that, like, you're not comparing him to other sophomores. When you're benchmarking where he needs to be producing where you would need a senior to be produced to select him in the draft, right? It's not always about potential. All of that stuff is important, but you can give more allowances to younger guys that are earlier in their development curve and may not be playing as well, but you're not comparing apples to apples with the senior age guy. That being said, I think he grades out pretty favorably compared to those senior year guys. I think he's hitting the benchmarks right now. I don't think it's going to be a problem for him. I just think that it's something to be aware of in the evaluation. Same thing as Keegan Murray. If you're comparing Keegan Murray to other sophomores, he's blowing them out of the water. When you readjust to the fact that he's an old junior, then you just adjust your thing. And it works the other way too. Franz Wagner last year was a freshman-aged sophomore, and you see him blowing sophomores out of the water, and you're like, okay, what if I compare him to freshmen, So I just think it's important for benchmarking guys more than anything else, and making sure that you're holding them to the proper standard.
Okay, that's fair enough. Yeah, and I'm glad that you pointed out that it's a way that you can evaluate players and benchmarks things like that, but it not necessarily being a disqualifier, right? So I think that's important to kind of point out when discussing age. I'm glad that you were able to speak on that. So for Dereon Seabron, I touched on the weight. You made a note of it as well. He's listed at 180. I don't know if he's only at 180. Maybe he's only at 190, but I think the point of the reason why I wanted to bring up the weight is obviously at the next level, albeit he's a little bit older, so maybe the potential of him maybe putting on weight at the next level. I don't know how you feel about that, but I feel like at that next level, and he puts on NBA level strength, that's only going to add to his game and that slashing ability. And I want to ask you another thing. I recently wrote on my big board that, I pointed to Kendall Brown and the guys that I had listed above him on my big board. The only reason that I had those guys higher, um, one of the things that kind of separated, them from him as far as where they are in the pack is that they have kind of that traditional shot creation ability. But I think when you look at a guy like a Kendall Brown, and I think even Dereon Seabron can fall into this mold too as a slasher, is that you don't have to always have the ball in your hand to create a shot. And I think that that's what Dereon Seabron is going to give a team as a slasher, right? That incredible motor, that ball movement, keeping a defender occupied, him not being able to kind of hedge off of him onto a, maybe a more high profile scorer, things like that. Um, Kind of what do you think about his ability to kind of fit in that mold? And I know that you touched on the shooting as kind of an area of concern for being a wing player at that next level. If you could just speak on that a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that the shot is a bit of a concern just because I don't think he exhibits like that natural touch that you want to see to project a jump shot out. He's shooting 70% from the free throw line. Not a good percentage from three. I think he's like 24%.
Yeah,
Um,
24.
I'm not I'm not necessarily sure it's a long-term issue. I think that it's been shown pretty consistently that when guys hit just the bare minimums, it's pretty you can project them to get to a decent level, but
Mhm.
I don't think people take you seriously as a threat anymore when you're hitting 35% of your catch and shoot looks on middling volume, I don't think it's necessarily that big of a deal unless you're hitting that higher threshold, which I'm not necessarily sure that it gets to. But I do think that, and especially the weight thing just looks weird to me. He looks so much bigger. He plays so much bigger, and when something like that happens, I'm a numbers guy. And numbers
Sure.
never lie. That's my background. But I have to trust the film that he's playing stronger and more physically than 180 pounds, and maybe it doesn't actually matter what the number on the scale says about him if he continues to play to that level. So yeah, I think that the weight isn't necessarily an issue as long as he is just battering people down to the rim. He's got 18 dunks halfway through the season, which is just absolutely nuts for a six
It's
seven perimeter
ridiculous.
guy. He's violent at the rim and big, strong NBA body. I'm not worried about the weight thing at all. I'm more worried about the mentality. Like
Mhm.
just getting in the gym, getting in the weight room, staying focused. I think that those are hurdles that he needs to prove that he can stay above consistently. But I think that he's off to a great start this year and that he's been working on his game. So I after Wesley, out of these guys that we're going to talk about, I think Seabron's my next guy.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Seabron. He's kind of another one of these guys. I don't really know what to make of him, so I'm a little bit bullish on where I have him listed. He's another one of these guys that I gave a second round grade to. But the more I watch him,
Mhm.
the more I watch other people too in this draft. I think that kind of goes without saying. He's probably going to work his way up, just solely due to his effort and just will to just throw down on top of anybody that's lined up from across from him. So now we're going to get into the guy who, out of this crop, I know it took a while to get here to a personal favorite of mine. I love Alondes Williams out of Wake Forest. Coming over, transferred from Oklahoma. He's a junior. third year in school, obviously, showing a lot of what we maybe wanted to see from him early on in his college career. He's completely unlocked now. Oh my goodness! Like for Wake Forest, first off, I think he just has a complete disregard for wanting to look a teammate in the eye and pass him the basketball. But he has a ridiculous amount of assists, over 5 per game. I think that number should be significantly higher. I don't know how many of his teammates are, at the beginning of the season were expecting him to pass him the ball, but I think they all have their hands up now and as the season has progressed. He's a 6'5" guard again. That's kind of the theme without, outside of Seabron, the 6'5", about 210 pounds, 20 points per game, almost 7 rebounds, 5 assists, half a block, a little over a steal per game, shooting 55% from the floor on almost 14 attempts, about 34% from deep on 4 attempts, and 71% from the free throw line on almost 6% or 6 attempts per game. Per synergy, he grades out in the 87th percentile offensively, and defensively, he's in the 38th percentile, which is listed as average defensively per synergy. CJ, how fun is Alondes Williams to watch for you? And if you could let's just talk passing real quick.
Mhm.
Talk to me a little bit about what you see in his passing game.
Yeah, he's a blast. I don't really understand what happened at Oklahoma. That obviously he played with Austin Reeves, who's clearly an NBA level talent, but
Correct.
I don't understand how we didn't see more of Alondes Williams before he got over to Wake Forest. Thank God he transferred because, as you mentioned, he's one of the most fun passers in college basketball this year. My favorite thing about him, as you alluded to, is just the entire court is open to pass at all times. It doesn't matter the angle. It doesn't matter who's in the way. He has eyes on all 4 of his teammates, and he knows exactly which one to distribute the ball to. And sometimes he picks the wrong one, and he picks a little bit of a harder pass just maybe to show off. It's a
Yeah.
great time. Strictly passing, he is a joy to watch how he processes the game. We kind of talked about this with Wesley. I think he's an excellent processor. You can kind of see him thinking 2 steps ahead, manipulating the defense, getting the looks that he wants with the ball in his hands, but also for his teammates. He's a really good time. I like Alondes.
Oh man, his passing is so fun to watch. And as I started diving into his game more, just couldn't stop myself from tweeting out like I'm falling in love with his passing ability. I don't know how. So let me ask you another draft question here, draft philosophy question. How high do you look at, or how high do you value passing ability? Does it vary by position? And further to expound upon that, how hard do you think it is to improve as a passer at the next level?
I think that passing is a difficult evaluation. I think
Mhm.
that there are guys, I break it down into reactive and proactive passers, right? There are guys that rack up a lot of assists, and they aren't bad passers, but what they do is they react very well. They read the defense, the man breaks open, they hit him, right? They're unselfish, they hit the right guy every time. And then there are proactive passers that have that LaMelo Ball creative wiring that are thinking next pass ahead, right? And I think Alondes is a guy that's thinking next pass ahead. I value it. I value passing highly because I value feel highly, but I try to make sure it's contextualized, right?
Sure.
Raw assists are not a great grade of passing, and they're not a great grade of feel. So I think that's the kind of thing that you can only really get from watching the film and watching the passes, seeing how the passes come, seeing what leads up to them. And to your point, I think that it's possible to become a better reactive passer. I think that you can watch a lot of film, drill a lot of things, and get the muscle memory down to hit the right guys at the right time. I don't think, I'm sure it's happened. I don't think it's a very common evolution to go from a reactive passer, even a very good one, to a next level thinker thing. I think it's like an innate, guys have it when they're very young and it's how they've always played the game kind of thing.
Hmm.
So it's valuable to me when I see it in a guy. And I think that it can be a little bit overvalued in guys. Like you need to have something else to unlock it, right? You need to be able to beat your man, to create a power play, to cause the rotations, to be able to have you pass. It's not quite as valuable if you're just a good passer, but can't do anything to make the defense respect you.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have that combination of a defender respecting you, or you can get by the defender, throw the defense into flux, then it like triples, quadruples in value, because then you can actually make things happen off of it.
Yeah, and that's fair. So let's get into it with Alondes Williamson. We just both gushed over his passing. I think one other thing that kind of helps you as a passer, size, and it's not like Alondes Williams is a freaky athlete, or is he, a Josh Giddey sized player, right? Like a 6'7", 6'8" playmaker, where you're able to kind of cover up for some of maybe your other, weaknesses or areas of improvement. Alondes Williams, 6'5", 210, not a super duper explosive athlete, but I don't look at him as a net negative or anything like that on that in terms of athleticism either. His passing ability is there. He's also scoring 20 points per game on pretty decent efficiency. You'd like to see that 3-point percentage be a little bit higher, but something to work with there. The passing is there. How else do you evaluate Alondes Williams just overall as an NBA prospect?
Yeah, I think you touched on it a little bit. I think that he's good with the ball in his hand, right? He's got that little bit of slipperiness that it's hard to keep him in front of you. He's very agile, like he throws changeups. He's a knuckleball driver. He doesn't beat you with burst, but he throws you off with little manipulations and gets by you, and can get up and put one on you. Like I always go back to dunks because it's just like an easy little rule of thumb that you could go just like as like a stand-in for vertical athleticism. And he's got like 13 or 14 on the year so far, halfway through the season. Like he's got some poster dunks on his resume already.
Yeah.
And it's always cool to see him slither into the lane and just like explode. His vertical athleticism is better than his like burst, his straight line burst for sure. And the 3-point percentage is tricky because he's taking a difficult volume of shots.
Absolutely.
He's hitting decently on 3-point shots, not great, but he also is 52% on long twos.
Yeah.
On the year, which is crucial as a evaluation tool, because most of the time those are not assisted. They're very often he's getting his own shots and he's pulling up and like hitting those shots. So that's a big thing for me. I think that his 3-point percentage might be a little bit skewed just because of the breakdown of his shots out of all of his catch and shoot. So not self-created, out of all of his catch and shoot threes on the year, 39 of them out of 53. So 73%, 39 of them have been guarded for synergy, and 26% of them have been unguarded, only 14. He's hitting the unguarded ones at a 42, 43% clip, but he's hitting the guarded ones at like a 30, 31% clip. So when you balance that out, it's below average as a whole, but I don't think he's a bad shooter. I think between the unguarded catch and shoot threes and the far twos self-created and the natural touch that he shows around the rim, he's a guy that I'm not worried about the shot very much, if at all. I think him and has been revelations this year, and he's just outside my personal top 40 right now, but I don't think that will stay that way very long. I've been really impressed with him, and the more I watched, the more I just enjoy watching him play, honestly.
Yeah, he's super fun for me as well, and I have a kind of a middling second-round grade on him currently, and it's getting hard for me. I think right now where we're at in the season, CJ, me personally, how I'm evaluating talent, I haven't necessarily cut my strings from preseason expectations and hope that maybe some of these guys that were built a little bit higher kind of come around to what those expectations are. But here moving forward, I'm starting to sever and, walk away from those preseason expectations and starting to reward guys now for what's actually happening on the court. So all of these previously mentioned guys, with maybe the exception of Aminu Mohammed, who has already worked his way up in my process already. Having said all of that, I think that, guys like an Alondes Williams can work their way up, maybe even start getting early second, late first round consideration based on, everything that I've seen, everything that we've both talked about.
And just
You,
rule of thumb thing that I work with on mine, just when I'm trying to project where guys are going to land in the draft. When I'm looking at my top 40, top 45, it's kind of maybe not a given, but a pretty good expectation that like 10 of those guys are going to return to school. Even the ones that you think like Jaden Ivey last year was a guy that
yeah.
was like, he was in almost everybody's top 30. And Ben Matherin was in almost everybody's top 20. There are guys that are going to go back to school. In a top 40, top 45, you probably have 10 that are going back to school, which when you say you think Mohammed or, Alondes is a late, like maybe an early second round pick, late first round pick, right now, maybe you have him 45, but things balance out as it gets closer to the draft.
Yeah, for sure. And we can only, speculate as to whether or not players come back. And it's really hard, like you just alluded to, CJ, it's really hard to kind of put a finger on a pulse this early, right? Like in early January, as to what people are going to
Yeah.
do come draft time, because we haven't seen the entire season even come close to being played out yet. But CJ, we're coming at the point now to where just here on the radio segment for Draft Capital, we're going to have to close out, but I want to let the listeners know that if they come and listen to the podcast version, we got one more prospect, Isaiah Mobley out of USC, that we want to discuss. So for that, you're just going to have to, as soon as you're done listening to us here on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio, go download Draft Capital, subscribe, rate, review, share, all that fun stuff. And more importantly, listen to the continued discussion with me and special guest, CJ Marchesani, here on the show. But CJ, before we move on to Isaiah, we're going to be signing out here for the radio segment. I would love for you just to have the opportunity to share you and your work and where the people can find you, for the listeners on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you for having me. This has been a great time. I know we got one more guy to get through. You can follow me at my name, CJ Marchesani, on Twitter. If you're interested in what I've been up to, I have a whole thread underneath, like my pinned thread. It's just all the projects I've worked on in the last maybe year and a half. I just came out with a mid-season look at a model I do every year. My top 40s there, if you're interested in that. My work is usually at the Stepien if I ever write anymore, which I'm so busy with other basketball stuff I almost never do.
Sure.
And my website is Roll Call Sports, where you can follow a bunch of other talented writers who are not me, but do a great job. So that's where I'm at. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, and again, CJ, thank you so much for joining us here. I want to also remind the listeners that if they like what they've heard, they can follow Draft Capital on Twitter at Draft Capital NBA. It's available on other social media platforms at that same handle. You can follow myself at Stephen G. Hoops on Twitter, and go to offtheballnetwork.substack.com for all of your sports needs. I contribute there, but we also have, professional basketball, college level, football and professional level there. We have sports betting, all that fun stuff. Again, offtheballnetwork.substack.com. We're just getting rolling over there, and we got more great work to come. But for my special guest here, CJ Marchesani, for myself, for Off the Ball Network, for the fine folks at Built Bar, this has been Draft Capital, and we'll catch up with y'all next time. Much love, everybody. All right, so continuing discussion here on Draft Capital for the podcast. If you're coming over listening to us on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio, thank you so much for tuning in. We have continued discussion here with CJ Marchesani of the Stepien and of Roll Call Sports. And we have walked through, CJ, the gauntlet of just funky players, man. We started off with Blake Wesley, Aminu Mohammed, Dereon Seabron. We just finished our discussion with my personal favorite, Alondes Williams. And now, to add to the funky five that we have here, Isaiah Mobley out of USC. Now, kind of different player from the previously mentioned one, right? He's more of a forward, maybe a 3-4, maybe even 5 at the next level. It really depends on where he goes and the schematics that they have for their team. 6'9", 238 pounds, giving you 15 points per game, almost 10 boards, almost 3 assists, close to a block and a steal per game, shooting 48% from the floor on 12 attempts, 44% from deep on almost 4 shots from deep a game, only 61% from the free throw line on just over 3 attempts per game. Offensively, he grades out in the 83rd percentile per synergy. Defensively, overall, 79th percentile. So much like his brother there, right? Like jack of all trades, can fill the stat sheet in a lot of different areas. Don't think that he's going to be the same, level or quality of player as Evan, but in his own right, a very talented and diverse player for USC. Um, which way do you want to go with Isaiah, man? Because there's a multitude of areas of the game where he makes great, tremendous impact for his team. I'll leave it to you. Is there a particular offensive skill set that you would like to lead off with?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the most important thing with Mobley is the shot. Is the shot? Is it going to be like that elite big man floor spacer level? Like, is he going to be a legitimately good, great shooter, or is he just going to be good for a big? And he's got soft touch. It's tough for me because I like to not rely on, but I like to check back in on free throw percentage just as like a natural touch, especially for big guys because
Sure.
typically they don't have the same amount of 3-point attempts, but they do have a lot of free throws. Over Mobley's career, he has hit 40% of his threes, 40% of his 117 threes. Great number for a guy 6'10". And he has made 55% of his 227 free throws. And it's weird to see such a stark difference for a guy that I
Yep.
think has pretty good touch, but just can't seem to figure it out at the line. And there's a school of thought that maybe 117 threes is enough volume to make a decision off of and just say, look, he's a weird guy. He is what he is. He shoots a lot of threes. He makes them. He shoots a lot of free throws. He misses them. But it's tough for me when I'm looking at double the sample of free throws and they're not there. So I think the biggest thing is because I have some other questions about his game. He's been great this year. He's the best player on an undefeated USC team. But
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest question is what threshold of shooter is he going to be at the next level?
Yeah, and that's fair. And that's, you know, to me, that's the most important skill set that he brings at that next level because I don't think that he's going to be asked to come in and be a team's best player in a lot of different areas like what we've seen with Evan, right? He's
Yeah.
probably going to be kind of more of your traditional, stand in the corner, stretch big, or maybe operate as a screener, pick and pop scenario. Maybe give you some attempt. I mean, he's not a bad finisher around the basket either. I mean, and if you look at his putback numbers on Synergy, he's a great rebounder and he knows what, and he can convert on second chance opportunities, things like that. So, it's almost easy and almost kind of like a an easy conversation to get to when we talk about bigs in the NBA. The first thing we want to discuss, obviously, is their ability to stretch the floor. It's more important now than ever, right? But Mobley does a lot of other great things. The finishing around the basket. We talk about the playmaking ability, almost 3 assists per game. That's fantastic. So he shows that he is another one of these field level guys, probably more of the reactionary playmaker that we discussed earlier as proactive, but at his position and his
Yeah.
dimensions, not a bad quality to have. I mean, at least there is playmaking there, right? So, what do you think? How do you think the other areas of his offensive game project at that next level? I mean, obviously, we could talk all
Yeah.
day long about the shooting, right? But you
Absolutely.
know, pick and roll operator, that's a big skill and a big demand for his position as well. He grades out well there, and rebounding and not the best rim deterrent though. Like that's another area in his game that I think is going to be a big knockdown. But
Yeah.
there's value for offensive bigs in today's NBA.
Yeah, that's it. Kind of all comes from the context of the shot, right? Because, like you touched on, he, in my opinion, is not a good enough rim protector to be a five at the NBA level. In short bursts, long bursts, if he's your rim protector, I think you're going to be bleeding points. I don't think he's an excellent defender. I
Sure.
don't really think he's a good defender. That being said, he's 6'10" and maybe he can shoot the lights out of the ball. Like, it's a big deal. And when you pair that with, which is something that I'm coming to value more and more the longer I do this, not just being that knockdown shooter, but being able to be dynamic off of a closeout, right?
Mhm.
It's more important in the playoffs and it's more important in those tight fourth quarters to when they're guarding your shooters tight that you need to be able to make a play. And I think Mobley can put the ball on the floor and make a play for his teammates. I trust him off of 2 or 3 dribbles, and I trust him finishing at the rim. And he has a lot of offensive skill sets that make a lot of sense in today's modern NBA at 6'10". It's very impressive, but he's going to have to do it at the 4.
Yep.
And he's going to have to do it at the 4 next to a 5 that guards the rim. One of the obviously PD Webb is a big presence on draft Twitter and now
Absolutely.
off to bigger and better things. But one of his methodologies that has stuck with me the most is the Sin Eater 4, right? You need your 4-man to complement your 5 or to complement something else you're missing in the lineup. And what does Mobley as a 4 complement, right? He has to play next to a very certain big that maybe is that rim running, protect the rim big. He's not going to be able to, in my opinion, play next to a guy like Jokic or Towns or any of those offensive-minded big guys, because a front court of those two, or honestly, 15 teams worth of bigs in the league, is going to be in rough shape. He needs to be next to a really, really strong defensive 5, which limits the places that he can go just by the numbers game. So it's kind of like the value of being so big and shooting is because it often also comes with defense. Mobley's doesn't really come with defense, but he's so much more dynamic than the typical offensive big. It's a tough value proposition to balance, and honestly one that I'm not sure I have a final definitive answer on yet. Honestly, I think that's something that I'm still working through.
Yeah, and myself as well. I don't have a draftable grade on him yet, but he's knocking on that door because of his offensive skill set, because of his physical dimensions. And I love the way that and shout out to PD Webb, you touched on the Sin Eater, as a 4. That's a tremendous way to look at it. And you see how players in today's NBA at the 4, it's kind of a dying position. It's just kind of like what you need more of, that's currently not given to you by, your 1, 2, 3, and 5. You need that out of your 4. And I love that aspect of, the Sin Eater mantra that was laid out there. So for Isaiah Mobley, I don't have a draftable grade, but he's right at he's definitely within, like, I would say my top 70 players, but he's not firmly within, that top 60 yet. He's kind of right outside there. I know you said you're working on that. Do you see any credence to maybe having him in anywhere from that 60 to 70 range, given with what everything we discussed already?
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I may need to do a little bit of updating. He's not in my top 80 right now. There's
Okay.
a decent amount of prospects that I like over him. But as the season goes on, he's another one that I want to see through Pac-12 play. If the Pac-12 had a bit of a down year last year, and I want to see the overall strength of the Pac-12, and I also want to see how he plays against it, because I think that conference play is going to be really important for him. I mean, if we're still talking about Mobley as a, I don't know what, 10, 11, 12 BPM guy, like up at that level threshold, it's going to be the point where I put aside a little bit of my maybe biases against him and try not to move him too far from the base rate of what I would for a guy his age and production. I'm trying to make sure I'm moving guys from like somewhere that makes sense. I'm not blindly just throwing guys on a board. I want to make sure I am starting at their production level and then adjusting from there. And I think if his production level continues at this pace and he keeps it all the way through conference play, then just by nature, his base rate, if you will rise. And I'll probably have him a little bit lower than I would most other guys with that production, but it's going to start to look like a draft pick if he carries this through the season.
And that's fine. Just one more point I would like to touch on there. You talked about biases, and I won't focus on yours here per se, but let's talk about how nepotistic the NBA can be, right? Like, you see the last name Mobley attached to him as a prospect, and you see the success that Evan is having here. we see it all the time with brother. I mean, Blake Griffin got his brother to play in the NBA for a cup of coffee for a little bit, right? We see sons of coaches and players now starting to work their way in the NBA, which is really fun to see. Do you realistically, it's possible though, right, that a team might take him just specifically because, well, not specifically because, but like coupled along with the production that you were just
Mm.
discussing and the fact that he's related to Evan, do you think that the nepotism that does exist to some extent in the NBA could find himself being a second round draft pick?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not even that he wouldn't have earned it. He's a good basketball player, and
Exactly.
I think worse basketball players that were related to other NBA players have made the NBA. I think that it's a pretty safe bet that Mobley gets at least a look
Hmm.
when he decides to come out, whether that be this year or next year. Um, his brother having a rookie of the year leading season certainly doesn't hurt that for him. And we got to compare and contrast them a little bit at USC, which I think is helpful, getting to see them next to each other. So yeah, I do think that I do think that that will play a factor, even if it's only a small one. I don't think he's going to be a first round pick because his name's Mobley. But if you're between two guys, I don't know, the last name does carry some weight.
Yeah, I mean we've seen it with Kenyon Martin Jr. late second round draft pick, and turns out that that wasn't that bad of a pick from Houston overall based on what we're seeing currently, right? So maybe team will fall in love with him solely because of his production, but I think that given what we've seen in the recent track record of the NBA, it's going to be hard to deny a team, at least like you mentioned, giving him a look because of his production, along with maybe even only a 5%,
Yeah,
reasoning behind taking him being because he's Evan Mobley's little brother or brother. He's
big
older,
brother.
right? Big
Yeah.
brother. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Big brother. There you go. But CJ, man, we made it through all of the players. I've learned a lot, and it's been such a pleasure, man, having you here on the show. It's been a long time in the making, but like I said, I'm glad to have you here on the show. We talked about our Funky Five players, and I'm all the smarter for it. Hopefully, and I'm sure that the listeners are as well. Before we sign off here for the podcast, man, I would love just to thank you so much for coming on the show and give you one more opportunity to kind of plug yourself and your work.
Yeah, I mean, this was a blast. Thank you. I it helps me too to talk through some of these guys, especially early on in the cycle, to kind of figure out if my evaluations match where I have these guys on my board and what I'm thinking about once I talk it out. So this was really great. I gave all my plugs. I don't want to beat it to death, but I do appreciate you
Sure.
having me on, and looking forward to maybe doing it again soon sometime.
Oh, dude, say when. You don't threaten me with a good time. Don't be nice to me just because people are listening to you right now. Because I will definitely have you back on the show. And I say that tongue in cheek. You're a really good dude, and I know that if you say it, you mean it. But it was a pleasure and a joy to have you here on the show. Definitely going to be reaching out to you sometime here in the near future to
Yeah,
pick your brain on some more players that I'm probably having a little bit more time with, or maybe just some we can have a lot of fun and talk about some of the more well-known players and just have fun talking about them too. But as far as the time here on Draft Capital, we'll go ahead and bring it to a close. Go check out the Stepien. Go check out Roll Call Sports for more of CJ and his associates' great work. Follow him on Twitter at CJ Marchesani. He's a great follow. All of the stuff that he puts out there is it is fun to tag along as far as watching and listening and reading too. So as for myself, I already plugged myself. I won't burden y'all with that anymore. We'll just close out here for Draft Capital. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and we'll catch up with y'all next time.